You undergraduates, and possibly some of you graduates who see me for the first time, have read in your newspapers and heard on the air that I was, at the very least, an ogre, a consorter with communists, a destroyer of the rich, a breaker of our ancient traditions, and that I breakfasted every morning on a dish of grilled millionaire. Actually, I am an exceedingly mild-mannered person, a practitioner of peace, both domestic and foreign, a believer in the capitalistic system, and for my breakfast, a devotee of scrambled eggs.
His name is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and this is his biography. I'm Mike Wallace. This is Biography. Our story, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. By 1940, Franklin Roosevelt had spent 2 exhausting terms in the White House fighting the Great Depression. Now the domestic emergency was over. But if he decided to run for a 3rd term, Roosevelt would have to face an international crisis. Hitler's armies were overrunning Europe, and in the United States, the people and their president could hear the drums of war coming closer day by day. Spring 1940. A tired Franklin Roosevelt tries to relax. The grueling years of fighting the Depression have taken their toll. I have to have a rest, he tells a friend. I want to go home and stay there. But he is concerned about the war in Europe, and he is being pressed for a decision on whether he will seek a 3rd term. You can't quit, a friend tells FDR. The war will be coming over here, and you'll wind up wondering why you gave up a job that only you can handle. Unable to decide, Roosevelt stalls for time. July 15th, 1940. The Democratic Convention meets in Chicago. The delegates are bewildered by FDR's silence. One party leader wires the White House. Tell us what to do, he says. This convention is bleeding to death. Finally, after 2 days of confusion, Senator Alben Barkley reads a puzzling message from the White House.
The President has never had, and has not today, any desire or purpose to continue in the office of President, to be a candidate for that office, or to be nominated by the convention for that office. He wishes in all earnestness and sincerity to make it clear that all of the delegates to this convention are free to vote for any candidate.
As stunned delegates try to read some hidden meaning into the statement, a single strident voice roars out of the loudspeakers.
We want Roosevelt. We want Roosevelt. We want Roosevelt. We want
The convention stampedes, and Roosevelt is nominated by acclamation. FDR makes his acceptance speech from the White House by radio.
It is with a very full heart that I speak tonight. I must confess that I do so with mixed feelings, because I find myself in a conflict between deep personal desire for retirement on the one hand and that quiet, invisible thing called conscience on the other.
FDR attends to his official duties during the first weeks of the campaign. He hopes to straddle the fence on the war issue, to satisfy both isolationists and interventionists. But there is harrowing news from Europe. The English ambassador brings Prime Minister Churchill's desperate plea for help. Hitler is massing troops in France for the invasion of England. Now, FDR makes a crucial decision. On September 3rd, 1940, FDR stuns the nation by announcing that he is giving the British Navy 50 destroyers. But he has acted without consulting Congress. Democratic leaders assure FDR has committed political suicide. Wendell Willkie, the Republican presidential candidate, lashes out at FDR. He calls the president's move the most dictatorial and arbitrary act of any president in the history of the United States. FDR is stung by Willkie's assault. He tells an aide, "Now I'm fighting mad."
I consider it a public duty to answer falsifications with facts. I will not pretend that I find this an unpleasant duty. I am an old campaigner and I love a good fight.
Determined to make every speech a blockbuster, he turns the campaign into a spectacular display of political oratory.
We know, if we but look at the record, that American business, big and small business, is way up above the level of 1932 and on a much sounder footing than it was even in the 20s.
When he ran for re-election 4 years ago, there were in America 9,400,000 unemployed. Today, there are 9,600,000 unemployed. Franklin Roosevelt doesn't know how, doesn't know what it means to either work with your hands or how to produce things so that other men can work.
The Republican Party, through its leadership, played politics with defense of the United States in 1938 and 1939. And they are playing politics with the national security of America today.
If his promise to keep our boys out of foreign wars is no better than his promise to balance the budget, they're already almost on the transports.
We will not participate in foreign wars, and we will not send our army, naval, or air forces to fight in foreign lands outside of the Americas, except in case of attack.
I call each of you to this cause, the greatest cause that ever was offered to free people. Rally around. We cannot lose. We must win. We will win.
The American people will not be stampeded into panic. The effort failed before, and it will fail again.
Finally, Election Day. By a decisive margin, Franklin Roosevelt becomes the first president ever to be elected to a third term. Inauguration Day, 1941. Roosevelt assumes the cares and burdens of a nation on the verge of war. FDR has no illusions. Personally, he is convinced that within the next 4 years, the United States will have to fight. Thousands of men are being called into the Army each month under the new Selective Service Act. But young draftees fight mock battles with make-believe weapons. The United States is totally unprepared for war. In Washington, interventionists picket the White House, and isolationists picket the interventionists. By fall of 1941, Roosevelt has done everything he can to prepare the country for the conflict he knows is inevitable. His hands are tied, writes a reporter. Now the initiative is passed to our enemies. If there is to be a war, they will have to start it. Roosevelt and Secretary of State Cordell Hull carry on crucial negotiations with the Japanese. They have demanded that Japan halt her aggression against China. But Japanese diplomats will not say what their government intends to do. Even at Hyde Park, Roosevelt cannot escape the tensions of the international situation. He tries to spend as much time as he can with his mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, whose health is failing. FDR's devotion to her is deep. He often laughingly calls himself a mama's boy. In September, Sarah Roosevelt dies. Grief-stricken, Roosevelt looks to a future filled with foreboding. Perhaps Mother died at the right time, he tells his wife. She would not like the kind of world that is coming. November 26, 1941. A special Japanese envoy and Ambassador Nomura leave the State Department with a final American peace proposal. They refuse to comment on the proposal. They have already been secretly informed by their government that war cannot be avoided. Sunday, December 7th, 1941. Cordell Hull rushes to the White House. Shocking news has reached Washington. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor. December 8th. Crowds gather in front of the Capitol building in Washington. They wait for the president to arrive for an emergency session of Congress. Once again, they look to FDR for confidence, for reassurance. Roosevelt's doubts, his uncertainty are gone. Now, at last, he can take action.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
December 1941. The flames of the Second World War have finally engulfed the United States.
Nobody knows when total victory would come, but we do know that the harder we fight now, the more might and power that we direct at the enemy now, the shorter the war will be and the smaller the sum total of sacrifice. Now, it is your turn.
FDR spearheads the greatest mobilization in American history. Within a year, United States defense plants meet quotas experts have called impossible. Tehran, November 1943. Roosevelt attends his first meeting with Churchill and Stalin. Roosevelt is determined to win the friendship of Joseph Stalin. He feels that Stalin, a ruthless veteran of cutthroat diplomacy, will change his ways when confronted with American goodwill. Don't worry about Stalin, Roosevelt tells his aides. I can handle that old buzzard. Tehran produces two crucial decisions. The Western Allies decide to invade the continent of France the following spring, and Stalin will launch a new offensive from the east. FDR arrives home in time for Christmas at Hyde Park. He poses with his children and grandchildren in a scene reminiscent of happier pre-war days. But he sees little of his family now. FDR's sons are in the armed forces. His wife, Eleanor, is preoccupied with war work. For most of the year, the family home at Hyde Park is deserted. In the summer of 1944, the Democrats meet in Chicago to choose their presidential candidate. There is little doubt who it will be.
I present to this convention for the office of President of these United States one who is endowed with the intellectual boldness of Thomas Jefferson, the indomitable courage of Andrew Jackson, the faith and patience of Abraham Lincoln, the rugged integrity of Grover Cleveland, and the scholarly vision of Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Thomas Dewey, the Republican candidate, conducts a spirited campaign. The presidency, Republicans claim, is a job for a younger man. Pride is hurt. He pushes himself unnecessarily during his brief campaign. In New York, he makes a 51-mile tour of the city in an open car despite the cold and rain. FDR makes few campaign speeches, but when he does it with the old Roosevelt touch.
These Republican leaders have not been content with attacks on me, or on my wife, or on my sons. No, not content with that. They now include my little dog, Fallon. You know, Fallon's Scotch. And being a Scottie, as soon as he learned that the Republican fiction writers in Congress and out had concocted a story that I'd left him behind on an Aleutian island and had sent a destroyer back to find it at a cost to the taxpayers of $2 or $3 or $8 or $20 million, his Scotch soul was furious. He has not been the same dog since.
Predictably, the vote is a Roosevelt landslide. FDR has won a history-making fourth term.
And when I say welcome home, I hope that some of the scribes in the papers won't intimate that I expect to make Washington my permanent residence for the rest of my life.
A changed Franklin Roosevelt begins his 13th year in the White House. His vitality is ebbing now. He suffers racking colds which last for months. FDR's lagging health is evident even in the newsreels.
Want glasses on?
If you please, sir.
The White House press staff tests special lighting effects to conceal his haggard appearance.
Mr. President, would you just give me one full profile? Would you just look full profile to your left, sir?
Exhaustion all but
Thank you.
submerges
Thank you.
the magic of Roosevelt's personality.
All right, thank you, sir.
All right. I can keep on looking at him. It's all right.
No, we want you out here. Now, would you just try the glass off once more?
February 1945, Yalta, the second conference of the Big Three. The war in Europe is nearly over. a tired FDR presses for realization of his greatest dream, a United Nations organization to ensure the peace. Roosevelt accepts Stalin's word that the occupied nations of Eastern Europe will be given their independence after the war. Exhausted, but pleased by the Yalta talks, FDR returns home sure that he has seen the beginnings of a new spirit of international harmony.
Members of the Congress, I hope that you will pardon me for an unusual posture of sitting down during the presentation of what I want to say. I know that you will realize that it makes it a lot easier for me in not having to carry about 10 pounds of steel round on the bottom of my legs, and also because of the fact that I have just completed a 14,000-mile trip. Days were spent in discussing these momentous matters, and we argued freely and frankly across the table. But at the end, on every point, unanimous agreement was reached. And more important even than the agreement of words, I may say we had achieved a unity of thought and a way of getting along together.
But within months, communist tyranny in Poland and Romania shatters Roosevelt's illusions about the spirit of Yalta. The communists have begun to enslave virtually all of Eastern Europe. FDR is forced to recognize grave errors in his judgment. He begins to fear that he has not done enough to ensure post-war peace. FDR goes to Warm Springs, Georgia to rest and recuperate from a bad cold. Years ago, stricken by polio, Roosevelt came here to regain strength and confidence. Always before, the quiet, the sunshine, have renewed his vitality. Suddenly, a terse news bulletin stuns the world. FDR is dead. On this day, Winston Churchill says, "To die at the height of a man's career, the highest moment of his effort, universally honored and admired, this is not the most unenviable of fates." The Roosevelt years are over. Franklin Roosevelt served in the White House longer than any other president. During the New Deal era, Roosevelt helped to reshape American society. In the war years, he had a decisive influence on the course of world history. Soon after his death, a politician who revered him said, "Roosevelt is not dead. He has left us a pattern so definite, so permanent, we cannot escape it." Mike Wallace for Biography.